to the AI in Action podcast series, Sarah.
Thank you, Hannah. It's great to be here.
So, what scares you the most about AI?
Yeah, what scares me the most is not so much the Hollywood version of AI risk or what people have referred to as the paper clip scenario, where it's like,
Mhm.
imagine the super intelligent AI and give it the goal of make as many paper clips as possible. Of course, that sounds harmless, but then it becomes extremely capable and only focuses on maximizing paper clips and then starts doing destructive things. So that people talk about, and I feel like that's kind of a caricature. And in some ways, I think one of the things that has happened is that some of those kind of existential risk questions or the Skynet have distracted from I think more, in some ways, more mundane and immediate and institutional risk. So my area of focus is in national security, and military domains. And so, to give an example there, one of the things I've been looking at is that AI is being incorporated and deployed far more quickly than most other technologies have been deployed in the military until now. And so I was in the acquisitions business in the Air Force, and things always took a long time, and people would be frustrated by that. But you come to realize that there's kind of a reason for that process, which is that the consequences of deploying technologies too soon before you know what the effects are is it has its perils. And so I think that is one of the things that worries me with deploying AI too quickly. So I see, and I've been writing about this in two different contexts. So one is the risk of kind of incoherence on the battlefield. So different parts of the military may use AI in different ways at different speeds, different assumptions. One unit might use it for planning, another for intelligence, another for logistics, one for targeting. And if those systems don't align, AI could create confusion instead of clarity. And so it could make these operations faster, but not actually better. And one of the things that we're looking at as well is the way that different people, just as I think we see in day-to-day life, people are using AI in totally different ways. Well, imagine that in a battlefield setting. So someone with a lot of experience gets the AI output and they say, well, I don't believe this, I'm going to override it. Or someone who's the much more junior person is like, well, I grew up with this technology. It must be right. And I don't know that those assumptions about how people use the AI are correct. What worries me a little bit is just that we don't know. And so these systems are getting deployed without actually having the data to know how people interact with the systems. And I think sort of a corollary to that is that, and I've seen this in different contexts before with technology, with drones and precision weapons, that they created the impression that war is more antiseptic, more precise, less politically costly. And I think that AI could deepen that illusion by making targeting or surveillance or analysis look more objective than it actually is. So I think there's a lot of the discourses around like AI is becoming too powerful. But I think that's not untrue. It's that I think it sidesteps the bigger risk that the human institutions that are using AI might overtrust it or misunderstand it or let it accelerate decisions that might remain or should remain politically and morally difficult. So we don't want to oversimplify things that actually we should ruminate and take seriously. So yeah, I mean, long answer to the question, but to say that I do worry that these kind of existential risk questions have obscured kind of a more immediate risk about how this is getting deployed in these national security settings.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really appreciate your emphasis on how just because AI is applied to something doesn't make it better. I think far too many people think it's the magic wand of accuracy and efficiency.
Right, right, right. Yeah, and I think we're seeing that in our day-to-day lives too, is like the how like and there's a lot of conversation around this, of course, but and I'm seeing this with my students, that they put their thing into AI and they're like, all right, I'm done. And it's like, no, you're just starting. And so, yeah, imagine that mentality, without new doctrine and protocols in a battlefield setting. And I think we can start to get a little bit worried.
So what are you hopeful about with AI?
Yeah, I'm actually like pretty optimistic about AI, despite what I just said. Because I do think, and my research has looked at this actually, the ways in which AI can make complicated systems more navigable for ordinary people. So what I was studying in some research I did about the ways in which AI can be used as tools for in the hands of, like your average Joe trying to understand, bureaucracy. We showed that it really can level the playing field and make these kind of Byzantine processes more legible for people. So if you think about like legal rules or school systems or tax rules, um, university requirements, insurance claims, think about all of the red tape we have in our daily lives. And most people don't know what steps they need to take or how to translate these bureaucratic languages into action. And my work showed that AI can help bridge that gap and it can make rules and processes understandable for people. Think about like what I worked on, and I think this actually applies to a lot of different areas, but there is a process by which when a federal rule is proposed that it's open for public comment. Well, what you can end up with is 200 pages of background documents and obscure, arcane technical details. And we found that most people just, glaze over. This is just too much. But if you then put those documents into AI and say, summarize this, and what should, I live 500 feet from this proposed building site. How should I be thinking about this? Is pretty darn helpful. And so it can help people write the email, fill out the form, appeal the decision, understand the process, ask the right questions. And so there's a real democratic and social benefit uh, for using AI in those ways. So things that once required specialized knowledge or expensive help can become more accessible. I've been reading about, how, and hearing about, and I think this is true, that there's never been a better time to start a business because
Mhm.
things like legal help, what are the forms I need to do? What are the skills I need? Whether it's or accounting stuff. All of that is so much easier now than it ever has been because of AI. So I think there's a real productivity boon associated with AI. And it's not to say that, and I think we'll get to this, that there's no downside, but those are the things that make me hopeful about AI. I think it's a real like enabler for so many people.
So how is AI changing our society? I know it's happening very fast.
Yeah, it is. It's changing almost everything, but unevenly. So, and I know not everyone uses AI, but that's, I guess, in part what I mean by unevenly is that some people are using it all the time for everything. Some people are still pretty wary.
Mhm.
But so maybe I won't speak to the question of, the people who aren't using it. But I do think that it is changing how people learn, how they work, how they code, how they organize information. The knowledge-based work is entirely different because of AI. Um, and so, yeah, I think that same changing everything, though, is what is causing some anxiety and uncertainty, especially around things like labor markets. One of the things that has been happening recently at university commencement speeches is, a couple of speakers have mentioned AI and they've gotten booed. And I think it's because people coming out with college degrees, they don't know what the future holds for them, whether they're a technical degree or not. And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty around things like labor markets. And, some jobs will change quickly, some tasks will be automated. And I think there will be dislocations, and all of that I think should be taken very seriously. But I also think, there's this lump of labor theory, which is that there's a fixed amount of work in the economy. And this view would say that if AI does more, that the humans are going to be able to do less. But I take a different view, which is that historically innovation has created new tasks, new industries, new types of demand, and positive externalities that we can't always fully predict in advance. So I think it's certainly true that AI is changing society. And what I think we don't yet know is exactly how, how is it going to change schools or firms or militaries, courts, regulators? Because we're still in a lot of ways at the beginning of this, and we're still kind of in that moment, those moments of flux where just speaking from like an educational environment like I'm in, I see that classrooms and teachers, professors are approaching it still very differently. And the adjustments are, I think, a bit uneven, whether you should fully embrace it or whether we go back to blue books or, how we adjust. But it's clear that this is kind of sending shockwaves through society.
Yeah. That's a great description of the current status. So what do you think people misunderstand about AI?
Yeah, it seems to me that the conversation has become a little bit, I don't know, bifurcated between the people who almost like the optimists and pessimists, the doomers and the boomers, that kind of dichotomy. I think some people really treat it almost like the magic is that because
Oh, yeah.
the output is fluent, the system must really understand the way a person, the world, the way a person does. And maybe there's that overconfidence in AI. And I think other people might dismiss it as just like a fancy search engine. And I think that misses how powerful it can be as a reasoning aid or a coding assistant. But I do think too that one of the big areas of misunderstanding is in the risk. And I think that that's a real challenge because anytime we have a new technology, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know. We don't have data. We don't know what we're looking at. And so, like I said earlier, we've spent a lot of time talking about existential risk, and I understand why. But I also worry that this is crowding out, more concrete and immediate risks, like the question of labor disruption or decision makers and how they're interacting with AI. So I think that is the kind of those are the ways in which people are misunderstanding AI. Just kind of, is this an elixir? Is this a huge risk? And I think all of that is understandable because it's so new. And when something is new, we don't have the data, and there's just all this
Mhm.
uncertainty.
So how do you think AI has the potential to impact democracy?
Yeah, I have to say, and I wrote about this a couple years ago, that I was really concerned for democracy because I had written about social media and the and foreign election interference and how
Mhm.
foreign actors could use our marketplace of ideas to insert themselves into the conversation through social media, pretending to be just kind of Americans masquerading as
Mhm.
Americans. And that, of course, did happen. And that was the, 2016 election, which then was the subject of a Senate investigation. And what they found was that, these uh, Facebook targeted ads had markings of, foreign influence, which is like little ways in which the language or the grammar is a little bit off.
Mhm.
And so, someone paying close attention would be like, oh, they missed an article there. So I wonder if that's like basically spam. And so I started working on in 2018 on because I was at a presentation by a couple of researchers at OpenAI, and they were talking about this thing called GPT-2, and this could basically kind of complete sentences and paragraphs and write for you. And I thought, wow, if you now put that technology in the hands of, nefarious foreign actors, now they're going to sound like Americans. And if you scale this, which that was the whole thing, that is the whole thing with AI, you can just scale things with a click of a button. Now you can have loads of, English speaking, ads or newspaper articles. I just was so concerned about how this could distort the democratic process. And so I have written about that, and I don't totally dismiss it. I think there is a worry. I'm less of the view, although I think this is still an empirical question, that people are duped by this content.
Mhm.
I actually think what's happening is the opposite, which is people, and this is also bad, but people just assume everything is, manufactured, everything is AI, so they don't believe anything. And I think that's a real risk because democracies depend on citizens believing that institutions are understandable and accountable and responsive. If AI makes government or makes it seem like nothing is authentic anymore, then people might just not believe anything. So then the
Mhm.
whole foundation, the whole pillar of democracy is on shaky ground. So I do worry about that, just kind of so much AI slop out there causing people to just dismiss everything and in some ways worse than that, only trust their, trusted partisan hacks. And that is not a great outcome for democracy because it just makes our polarized system even more polarized. I do think, as I said earlier, on the positive side, the AI can help citizens deal with institutions and make government more accessible. So I think there are some upsides, but I think those things are certainly in tension.
Yeah, it's great points about how you kind of connected the dots as far as how it can, kind of erode the concept of truth and public trust widespread.
Hmm, for
I think
sure, for sure.
folks, so many people aren't, it's not on their radar. I know kind of in my own little circle, I'm definitely observing what you're describing of where people are just assuming everything is,
Hmm.
manipulated information, or it's all fake, right? It's all inaccurate. And that stems, I'm definitely seeing what you're saying is they've got really polarized sources that they'll believe anything that comes, from that one thing. And that's not critical thinking. That's not good research.
That's really well said, right? Like, do we lose our critical thinking the more AI is out there? And I think that's something that I'm reading a lot about is like whether it's in schools or in the workplace or in a democracy, are people just taking all these shortcuts now because of that?
Mm,
I think that's a real
yeah.
risk.
So what safeguards do you think should be in place regarding AI?
Yeah, this is one where I think I'm probably a little just, at odds with what I just said, but also with a lot of my colleagues because I think that there is these are concerns, but don't think that reaching right away for new laws
Mhm.
is the answer either. And there are a couple of reasons for that. You know, one is that this technology is moving so quickly, and because like that uncertainty that I talked about is both a cause for anxiety, but in a way a cause for kind of waiting and see too, because we don't know. And, you know, in Europe, for example, they moved very quickly on AI regulation. And, you know, you know, what I say in the book I have coming out is that I don't think there's one correct value structure here, is that the Europeans probably still say that that was the right thing to do. Like they don't want to wait and see. But there are consequences to that, which is that their economy is not, you know, surging in the same way that the United States economy is. We're a very dynamic economy, and so much of the growth right now is because of in the US economy is because of AI. So, you know, I think there's a lot, so much upside economically to allowing this technology to continue to surge and accelerate, that I would worry about taking aggressive measures that could actually impede that, especially given that A, we don't know what the consequences of AI are, and B, I wonder just whether those would even have the intended effect or whether the technology is moving so quickly. So I think that it makes more sense for there to be things like transparency about when AI is being used in decisions, you know, so that people can understand kind of that this is kind of where humans are still making decisions or where AI is being used, you know, whether it's on like employment decisions or military targeting, things like that. Um, and I think just continuing to have these conversations actually about AI is really important. Sort of what kind of society do we want? What kind of rules do we want? You know, there, for example, there are a lot of ads now in this election cycle that are AI generated. Is that okay? I think it, you know, I think most people would say that, and you know, different states have different laws on this, on where that line is, you know, between AI and now, like, when I was looking at this recently, that most states that do have laws have them against what are called deep fakes, where it could look real but isn't. And a lot of the AI electoral ads right now are clearly not real. So it's a really tricky thing. And as I said, because this technology is so dynamic and it's evolving and our relationship with it is evolving. I think a couple years ago, there was a real sense that you needed to like have these watermarks and everything needed to be disclosed. This is AI. But now there's so much AI, it's almost silly to label it AI because everyone knows it's AI. So I think it's a real challenge to figure out kind of what are the right safeguards, in part because we don't know yet what the safety issues are. So I think it comes back to what you had said. We just need to have critical thinking around it and adjust and create kind of norms as this evolves in this very dynamic way.
So what do you think an AI empowered future will look like for Americans?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best version is a future where more people can do more things. So a student, you know, I have a high school kid, and this summer they're going to be taking the SAT. So they do their first, and I think this is actually a good example. So the College Board, which administers the SAT, is working with Khan Academy. And so the kid would take a practice SAT, and then it gets analyzed by AI, you know, that Khan Academy is using. and then can target and say, okay, here's now a study guide or a study set of practice that corresponds to the areas where you need work. And, I think that's a great future where students that the educational environment can be targeted to students based on where they need help. Or a business owner who is on their own. They have one person, they don't yet have money or resources to hire a legal or an accountant or someone for marketing. Now they have, a one person business that they're empowered to do all those things. They can do their own marketing because now they can create an ad by themselves. Or a patient that can be empowered because they are investigating their scan and having it understood with an AI before they even go into the physician so they can understand and advocate for themselves. They couldn't do that anymore before AI. So I think this is a really optimistic case where AI is a bridge between people and the complicated systems they interact with. So as I started at the outset, I'm very optimistic about the future for society and democracy, but I am also cognizant that there are with all technologies, it's not all upside. And so we need to be continuing to kind of account for what those negative externalities are so we can think about, what those risks, and what the adjustments might look like so we can get the tool that expands human agency without compromising on the downside.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on and sharing your insights on AI in action. You tackled some very complex, moving targets, and you made them make sense. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannah, for having me.